I'm presenting a study that evaluated a Slovenian version of a massive online open course called ILO, or Information Literacy Online. This MOOC is a result of a 3-year Erasmus Plus project with 6 partners. Here you can see the link and the basic website of this MOOC, and you can see that it contains of 6 linguistic versions, Slovenian being one of them, and the rest are German, English, Spanish, Catalan, and Croatian. ILO is designed to cover the entire information cycle during the study process, and it's aimed specifically at beginner students, the students that are entering their studies. As you can see, it consists of 6 modules, from orienting in an information landscape to research competences, to searching competences, to competences for the critical evaluation of information, then information use, and the creating something based on the information. So it's designed to contain 6 modules. Each module then contains several lessons, and each lesson, of course, consists of several units. After the first version of the MOOC was completed, we need to note that we are presenting this paper with a 1-year delay due to COVID pandemic. We were supposed to be presenting it at the last year's ECIL. So we wanted to evaluate the Slovenian version of the MOOC through investigation of user perceptions. So it is important to note that this is an entirely learner-based evaluation. We did not include any experts in the evaluation procedures, and we also did not measure progress in students' knowledge. We only focused on the MOOC, on the environment itself, and tried to find certain things about user experiences with the MOOC, and certain things about the user perceived usefulness of content in terms of learnability. That means we were asking them, or we were trying to investigate, what have they learned and how? In this regard, we shaped 2 research topics, or 2 research questions. In each of those 2, we have 2 questions actually. So the first one was, which positive and negative experiences regarding the interface and the system do participants report on the MOOC as a whole? And are there any particular experiences regarding individual modules that they were using? And the second one was, how useful is the content of the MOOC as a whole from the perspective of the participants, from the learning point of view? And are there any particular perceptions that we can assign to individual modules? We use qualitative approach, qualitative methodology, combining 2 methods, the method of diary and the method of interview. And our sample was, as this was a small-scale study, was entirely purposive. We included 2 experienced students of library information science who were at the final year of their master's studies. That means in their 5th year. They went through all 6 modules as users in 6 weeks, November and December in 2019. They kept a diary while using the modules. It was following a predefined evaluation framework that I will present in my next slide. And after completing each module, they were asked to answer interview questions. The diary, or the framework for the diary that we were using, focused on 3 aspects. MOOC as a whole, that's the perceptions of the entire MOOC. Here we we included features like interface features, logical sequencing, how instructions were given, how the video was used, perceptions of language and grammar, tools for synchronous and asynchronous communication, and so on, tools for preparation and handing on of the assignments, feedback, collaborative work, and so on. The second aspect was on the concluding page, of the MOOC. The feedback options, the follow-up options that it was offering, perceptions of the certificate of participation, and so on. And the third one specifically focused on the use of videos. They were asked to assess the quality of picture and sound, quality and sensibleness of content, appropriateness of length, the subtitles, and so on. For each of the elements, they had a 3-point scale to use. They marked if, for the most elements, it was possible to mark if it was there, if it was present, partially present, or absent, not there, and give comments. They were asked to give comments on what they thought, on their experience, on how useful things were, and so on. And on the right, you can see the questions of the interview. So after completing each module, they answered how well did it go, what emotions did they feel during the work, what have they learned, how do they expect to be able to use the knowledge, and which particular positive or negative experiences can they describe. Both sets of data were then assembled and content analyzed. Here you can see just a sample of the scheme that they were using for the diary. So on the left, in the left column, you've got each of the elements. Then they could mark if it's there or not there, and some marked it as partial. And on the right, they were able to give a comment. And here you can see a part of table 1 in our paper with already analyzed data from the diaries. For each of the elements, we gathered perceptions, or we gathered how many participants marked it as present and absent, and we divided comments into positive and negative commentaries. So you can see that, for example, for the interface, adaptability and consistency, the positive comments were about its simplicity, attractiveness, contrast. There were comments on nice visual elements. And one, for example, student even said that inconsistency is attractive. And the negative comments tackled the not so good adaptability, that it should be adaptable or that it was not adaptable. And a few students marked it or commented that it was annoyingly inconsistent, ugly, unattractive, static as a bad thing, and so on. And for each of the elements, we gathered and analyzed these comments. We shape our results and discussion into two groups following our research, our two research topics that I presented at the beginning. Regarding experiences with the MOOC, we found that they were mostly connected, or they were about both technical and content-related features. The students liked easiness of navigation, the function to resume, to return to the MOOC to the point where the user has ended his or her previous work, the bookmark option, and interactive table of contents. They were relatively satisfied, or let's say not very unsatisfied, with the interface design, length of materials, and they kind of liked the use of various formats of presenting information, for example, text, video, exercises, and so on. And quite a lot of comments were on the, let's say, negative side. They did not like that the modules were rather different in terms of their length and difficulty. They found some models easier than others. The structure was perceived as inconsistent. The use of video was inconsistent in terms of length, placement, linguistic and grammatical errors, illogical sequencing, and so on. Some content was found illogical or confusing, wrongly designed. For example, the final quizzes which required the exact form of each word to be typed in, or which did not provide feedback to the learner, which answers were, let's say, the correct ones. They found some exercises underestimatingly easy, too easy, and they found this annoying. They would like to have more practical exercises. There were too few. The interaction was employed inconsistently. The feedback options were not liked by them. They were poor. Interactivity, the same. Poor accessibility from other devices, and so on. And they, many of them specifically mentions that there were no tools for preparation and handing in of assignments. They would like to have this option to hand in their assignment in the MOOC. There were some different perceptions regarding individual modules, of course relating to the differences in their structure, length, balance of text and videos, interactivity, and so on, and the overall sense of direction. They were able to orient themselves much better in some modules than in others. The second is a perception of the MOOC usefulness in terms of learnability and the overall perceptions. They found, which was actually a very positive thing, they found ILO useful and valuable, especially for beginner students, although they themselves were not beginner students at all. So most comments, a few of them you can see on the screen, were positive in the sense that they liked the existence of such a tool, that they would have liked to have it when they were beginners, and they are happy for their younger colleagues to be able to use such a tool. And of course, there were some differences in, like I already mentioned, in the perceptions of individual modules. 3 of them, module 1, 2, and 5, were received more positively than the other 3. For the module 1, they actually noted that it was pretty much theoretical and quite long, but useful. So they found it useful to for the module 1 to set the background on the information landscape. Module 2 and modules 5 were pleasant and useful in terms of form and content. And on the contrary, the modules 3, 4, and 6 were perceived as not very useful, especially modules 4 and 6. They actually kind of commented that it was nothing new for them, that they did not learn much, but also that they were not offering enough interactivity or variety of formats. While module 3, the one on the search competences, was found to be too difficult. It lacked a variety of formats, but the most important and the most common comments were that it was too difficult. So what are the implications here? The first group of implications, as we divided them, tackles more technical issues of the MOOC. The one finding, of course, is that more links and navigation options should be offered between parts of the MOOC, and to offer more options to navigate through the MOOC. Interface consistency should be leveled throughout all 6 modules. This is probably due to the fact that each module was prepared by a different project sub-team, and it led to some inconsistent solutions, let's say. Tools for preparation and handing in of assignments should be added. Tools for assessment, feedback tools, of course, and of course surveying tools were also missed by the students. And another thing that was mentioned quite often was the linguistic aspect. The Open edX platform, which is used for implementing the ILO MOOC, is obviously not very well suited to host multilingual content, because many areas of the interface were not, or were only partly translated into Slovenian. For example, the forward and back buttons, one button was translated, the other one was not. I mean, it's not a problem for our students to learn, to know English. They understand English and they understood what the content was about, but they complained that it was not in their mother tongue. Also, content was in some places poorly translated. This had to do with the, let's say, production process of the MOOC, which perhaps focused too little on the translation phase. The second aspect of the implications concerns the content, or more concerns the content of the MOOC. What would be needed probably is a thorough overall post-production of the MOOC, which would improve and ensure consistency, proper sequencing, and all the necessary basic elements and features. For example, inconsistency of MOOC structure, length, difficulty, use of formats, the illogical, confusing, perhaps inappropriate content, the linguistic grammatical flaws, the varied length of modules, the exercises, and so on. These issues are, let's say, relatively easy to resolve, although they do require some thorough work with the MOOC material. The others, as the surveying tools, feedback tools, assessment, and so on, are much more difficult to ensure, simply due to the fact that this MOOC is a non-moderated product. It does not have a live moderating team to look after it. And also, we of course are aware that in terms of evaluating the content, evaluating the pedagogical approaches, instruction design, and so on, we would of course need, besides the user opinions, of course we would need the opinions of the experts, the pedagogical experts. So where does that lead us? We did find that the users were giving more negative than positive comments taken as a whole. But this probably had to do with the fact that the participants were specifically asked to look for areas that needed improvement in the MOOC. We are quite happy to see that generally the opinions on the MOOC, regardless of how things were realized in the technical sense, the opinions were generally positive. And they also said that the MOOC should be continually developed, that they found it useful for their future younger colleagues. In terms of our study, we have to say that we found our methodology rather useful. Our combination of the qualitative methods was useful just for this part of the evaluation. It could be used in the future for further MOOC evaluations, and perhaps also in evaluations of other online learning and teaching content. But of course it should be enhanced, as our study was a rather small scale, and it only tackled some aspects of the MOOC. It should be enhanced with a more thorough analysis, inclusion of more aspects and topics. It should be done on a larger scale, including other participants, for example, experts, and perhaps also include the measurement of the progress in student knowledge of information literacy. So we are rather skeptical considering the, let's say, issue of being able to draw global recommendations for the creation or evaluation of MOOCs. I don't think this particular study is reaches that far, but potentially it could be seen as a starting point when thinking about evaluation procedure in terms perhaps of methodology, of course enhanced with other approaches, contents, and participant groups. Nevertheless, this is still valuable information for developers of this particular MOOC, especially in terms of its 6 linguistic versions. But of course, also to other participants, to other users, for example, university teachers who would be considering to include the MOOC in their teaching or in their requirements for the students, and of course, perhaps even for the students themselves. There is a small disclaimer that we have to give at the end. The ILO MOOC has already been corrected in some areas in the meantime, which means that certain findings are no longer relevant. The MOOC itself is already a little bit different now, and of course further evaluations should be repeated on its improved version. Thank you. This concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.